to the Shades of Entrepreneurship, where we interview entrepreneurs to inspire the future entrepreneur. I'll be your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. So grab a drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. My next guest is a pioneer in cloud computing that he actually helped craft the term cloud computing. After selling his software and service company Joint to Samsung, he's back with a new idea. Please welcome the founder of Federated Computer, David Young.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. This is your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. Today, I'm here with David Young. David, how are we doing?
Doing well, Gabriel. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on the show. Again, we're kind of briefly talking about this. David's actually calling in from Colorado. But man, we're really talking about some of the innovative things that David has done, specifically his open source company that he has. But before we get into all that, David, go ahead and introduce yourself. Who is David Young?
Who is David Young? You know, I've been trying to figure that out for 50 plus years. So I thought we were doing an entrepreneurship podcast. So we were going to do a little bit of therapy. Into the wrong one. A little bit of therapy, but I've had a pretty varied career. I didn't study technology or business in college. I studied ancient Greek, and that's where I think I sort of got to learn how to think. But I went from there, worked for a few years on Wall Street. And Wall Street's sort of this amazing place, especially at the time that I was there, where everyone was trying to use new technology to differentiate the banking business, sort of better ways to do trading and all that. And so help with some of that, and then have been doing basically startups the rest of my time. So Silicon Valley-based startups. Have done a few of those. Started a company called Joyent, Joyent, which is now part of Samsung. And Joyent was really the first cloud that you could buy a container or a virtual machine from. So before there was Google, before there was Amazon Web Services, there was Joyent. And we did a lot of very innovative things there. Companies like Twitter started on us, Facebook Developer Program, all that sort of thing. We were only able to start Joyent because of open source. And when I and my co-founder had left a previous company, we're sort of kicking around. We wanted to start this company, start the sort of technical infrastructure for the company. But at the time, you had to go and buy really expensive databases, rack and stack a bunch of servers. And so Joyent was sort of this desire to sort of make it easier to build the technical infrastructure of a business. And that was very successful. And we wouldn't have been able to do Joyent without open source. So I would say from there, I really sort of developed a passion for developing and delivering tools to people that allow them to think outside of the constraints of sort of big companies. And this was at the time of Web 2.0 when everyone was doing sort of crowd outsourced content. As I said, Twitter started on us. A lot of other companies started on us, big sort of social media networks. And that was all empowered by, the ability for these companies. They all started small, and they all needed the ability to sort of stand up infrastructure. And that was very, very fulfilling to be able to deliver those sorts of products to people. And I've had a sort of long-term passion for bringing people tools that allow them to build their own business.
That is so absolutely fascinating. I'm very intrigued to kind of talk about your transition into entrepreneurship, because it looks like you went to education or schooling for a completely different reason. So how did that transition occur?
Well, I grew up in a family where there was a real emphasis on literature and thinking. And so, I just sort of had this prejudice, I guess I would say, that I'm not going to go to school to sort of learn a trade per se. I'm going to go to college to sort of take stuff that's going to expand my intellectual horizon. And so I had done some Latin in high school, and I really liked that. And so it sort of combined two things that I loved, which is foreign language, a dead foreign language, but a foreign language nevertheless, and literature and archaeology and history and all those sorts of things. And so that's what I did. And it actually turns out that students that pursue the liberal arts tend to go further in their careers because they've sort of built this foundation of thinking. I was very fortunate early on in my career when I was finished with undergraduate. I thought, well, the next step for me is probably to go on and get a doctorate in classics. And I'd actually been accepted to a few programs and was talking to some of the heads of those programs. But one of them said to me, maybe you should go and look to see what's available to you in industry, in business. And so I was fortunate to be introduced to a recruiter at one of these Wall Street firms. And they really had a sort of passion for this was before the time of sort of diversity and inclusion and all that. They just wanted to bring a bunch of different types of thinkers to the table. And they saw the value of that. And so I was one of those. I didn't have a math background. I didn't have, sort of the typical finance background, but they felt that I might be able to think. And so, I started there. The first week I was sort of thrown into the deep end, had to learn Lotus 1, 2, 3, all that sort of stuff to begin to track the values of U.S. Treasuries. But it was great. I mean, I really took to it like a fish to water. You were able to think creatively, and that's what finance was at the time. I'm not as in touch with the business or the industry today, but at the time it was just sort of, what could we do now? And you just sort of had these tools, as I said, technology. We use technology as a means to sort of extend our intelligence and be able to sort of get out there and do more with, the sort of thinking that we had. And I really, really enjoyed that. A lot of late nights. It was in New York City, so I got to, know the city very well. But, I just sort of felt that I had found my place. Ultimately, working at a big company was sort of constricting because you're encouraged to be a thinker, but there's lots of layers of politics and, hey, it's a great idea, but we got to go and convince these 15 vice presidents and executive vice presidents about the idea. So I became very intrigued about sort of doing the startup thing. And I had an old friend of mine from New York who had moved out to Silicon Valley and was doing a startup. And so we sort of jumped in together and did that. Ultimately, that startup was a failure, but it was sort of another jumping into the deep end where, we got to learn a lot of stuff about fundraising, about product development, about, how you sort of define your product and find those initial customers. Really fantastic.
One of the things you just mentioned that I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure if I'm saying it exactly, but you said, technology allows us to further our thinking or something along that lines, which is really accurate, and I think it allows us to diversify our thinking as well, right? Because it brings in different perspectives of different areas that, and you kind of alluded to that as well, right? With the Wall Street recruiter bringing in a diverse amount of thinkers. Now, talk about a little, let's expand a little bit on that in regards to technology allowing you to expand your knowledge. Tell us a little bit about open source for those maybe that are maybe unaware of what open source is. Let's kind of first give them a general definition of what open source is, and then talk about how you've used it and then what you've created.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So open source is this sort of community development ethos where instead of developing software on a team and it's proprietary and the software is there's no difference between software and creative writing. So imagine, you're sort of writing a book or you're writing an idea, a play. And one way of developing that would be to sort of say, I'm going to do it on my own and I'm going to own this and I'm going to bring it to market, whether that's publishing the book or putting the play on, whatever. Another way to do it is sort of say, well, let's work together and let's sort of write this thing together. Now, software is a little bit different. It has sort of the outcome of software is different than a book or a play or a movie script or something like that. But in some ways, I just mentioned movie script. It is a lot like creating a movie in the sense that the more talented people you could sort of bring to the table and those outside ideas, the better the project should be. And so that's difficult to do when the software project's proprietary because you have to go out and recruit those people. You got to get the money. You got to keep them motivated. Whereas in an open source project, you're basically saying, well, let's create this project, but no one's going to get paid. No one's going to, no one's going to get paid directly. We can talk about how that works, the sort of economic system here. And it's a very good system, but no one's going to get paid directly. We're going to work on this project together, and all of our creation is going to be available to everyone, not just that they can get the source code and they can see what it is, but they can also use it. They can use it freely. And there's a lot of different things when it comes to what's called the licensing, the sort of legal right to use that. It turns out that open source has been so successful, this sort of manner and method of development, that it's taken over the world. And so when I founded Joyent, back in the day, very, very few of the servers that were connected to the internet used open source software. But now it's very, very rare to find a server, a machine where you're talking to it on the back end that isn't running some version of an open source operating system, typically Linux, Linux, which is a big open source project that is used. And this sort of method of development is not only been applied to operating systems, but it's been applied to applications, both the desktop applications that we might install on our computers or on our phones, but then also SaaS applications, the sorts of applications we get over a browser. And again, it has the advantage of bringing more perspectives to the table, so you can sort of see, you end up, honestly, in my opinion, over time, maybe not in the first little rush of effort, but over time you get a better product. You also get a more secure product because more people have eyes on the product. So you're going to get fewer bugs, or if there are bugs, people can fix them. They're not sort of beholden to Microsoft to fix a problem in Windows or add a feature that everyone really needs. That's just something that can be added into the open source project. I'm simplifying somewhat, but this is really the power of open source. And I go back to sort of empowering people to use technology for their own benefit, rather than sort of waiting for an Apple or a Microsoft to say, well, hey, peasants, this is what we've decided to give to you. In an open source world, you actually get to participate. And you don't have to just be a coder. People can contribute to open source with documentation, with sort of explainers. There's a whole ecosystem that's really, really vast. And, I think that as I've been in this industry, more and more of the industry is being taken over and empowered through open source.
Yeah, and one thing I kind of consistently talk about entrepreneurs is in professionals and industries, doesn't matter where you're at. I always consistently say at the end of the day, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone using AI. And open source is kind of a similar thing. And what David is kind of talking about. So folks, if kind of just drilling it down to the simplest thing, I think one day you're probably going to see phones that have already Chat GPT in it, right? And so that's the open source, right? So it's integrated with that kind of piece. And to David's point, it's kind of funny. I'm working on that Microsoft 360 right now, part of my career. And I'm like, man, I wish I could have more people have access to this automation system that I'm trying to build so I could understand why some of these triggers aren't working in my workflow. But I'm also limited to the only people that work in my organization because it is an enterprise system. So only those that have the .edu email have access to it. So again, it's very limited. Whereas David's mentioned with the open source, you have multiple people. You don't have to pay for the system. It really is a great way to share knowledge. But more importantly, David, I'd be very interested to understand how can businesses How can they transform themselves using open source?
Yeah, so that's been a problem. I mean, this is one of the things that we're trying to solve at Federated Computer. There's all these tremendous tools out there, and most of the open source tools to date have been tools that are really focused on developers. But if you're, say, a plumber, or you run a landscaping company, or you're a law office, or these are all customers of ours today, that's more difficult because you're not your sort of core focus of your business is not technology per se, but you recognize the value of open source. You recognize that it gives you a better price. It gives you more privacy because your data is your own. It's not it's not being jacked around. Like recently, Microsoft announced that they were going to be taking literally screenshots of people using Windows 11 for the purposes of training their AI. So you don't have to worry about those sorts of, in my opinion, really egregious violations of your data privacy and your data sovereignty when you're using open source. But as I said, it up to recently, it was very difficult to adopt it. And so what we've done at Federated Computer is really sort of try to figure out ways that we can automate, make it easy for companies to adopt open source. So instead of using Zoom, you use Jitsi. Instead of using Google Workplace or Office 365, you use Nextcloud. Instead of using, Airtable for no-code database, you use Baserow, and on and on and on, so that from Federated Computer, you get all the different open source SaaS products that you might want and might need to run your business. And it's very complete, but it's completely yours. And instead of, the average business today is spending somewhere between $300 and $400 per employee per month for all this software. With Federated Computer, because we're using open source and we're leveraging the power of open source and our experience delivering cloud services to customers, a business spends $120 for the whole business on top of Federated Computer. So we typically save a business a lot of money, so much money that they can use that money for promoting their business on Google, or maybe they hire another person to do that landscaping, or whatever it is. They can use that money to promote their business, but they still get all the great tools that they need from Federated Computer and from all these open source projects. Now, people sometimes say, well, geez, that sounds really interesting, but what are the problems with going to an open source transformation of your business, an open source makeover? There's no question that there's switching costs. I mean, you're going from doing it one way to another. And it's kind of like going from Windows to Mac. You're getting a little bit better, but you still have to learn a different system. But we've found that typically a business that adopts open source, there's going to be about 1 or 2 months of getting your bearings. But then once you've done that and you sort of get through that process, you're off to the races. And we have large customers with hundreds of employees. Yeah, there's a rollout process, there's a migration process, but in time they find, oh my goodness, we're saving all this money. We have digital sovereignty, digital privacy. But the big thing really happens is because they've gone through this sort of open source transformation, now they have flexibility. And this is where my career sort of comes full circle, because now they can use the tools to build things for their business, or sort of use this data in ways that was never possible before. And that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking at the folks. If you haven't yet, check it out. The Federate.com. It'll be on the shadesofE.com. Go ahead and check out the website. I believe that's actually Federate.computer.
That's right.
Check out that website, the software. It's really, really cool. So think about it this way. You're able to take MailChimp, Shopify, Calendarly, Box, MS Team, all of these essential. And again, every single one of these products, these SaaS products, is another bill, right? It's another membership. Right. It's another activity thing. It's all in one. And so I'm even looking at it myself, because I swear, I'm literally, before this conversation, David, I'm over here. I'm trying to figure out, why is my copy AI not connecting over to my Google account so it can connect to my Zoom account, so my transcriptions can automate, so my blogs can like all. I'm basically working through all this process, and I'm like, God, I have to pay for my Google, I have to pay for my Zoom, I got to pay for my copy. I got to pay. Like you start going down this list, this laundry list of things, and then you start to think about it, it's like, man, I still don't have all of the tactics I feel I really truly need for all the business. So essentially what this does, it really does consolidate a lot of these services into, one product that allows you to do multiple things in a very easy one session, one single use sign on kind of way. Is that correct?
That's right. And I noticed in the background, I think it may be a virtual background, I noticed the football stuff. And I'm a big football fan, but it's kind of getting ridiculous, right? Where if you want to watch a football game, it's like, do I need a Netflix
Oh, yep,
subscription or do
very
I need a
true.
peek out? And that's what's happening with software, which is, you're just sort of having to bring together all these various subscriptions. They each have different ways of managing users. And so we've solved all that for open source for businesses. And I think, it's not for everyone. Like I said, some people, they feel more secure by just sort of doing what everyone else is doing. But there are businesses, there are entrepreneurs out there that see the value of having that flexibility. And they're sort of saying, how could I sort of do interesting things in the way that people are coming to my website, capturing that data, and then doing things as far as email sequencing, or as you mentioned, AI or other sorts of things. And if the data is not yours, you don't have the opportunities to sort of mix and match the stuff in the way that you see for your business. And I think that's the power of these technical tools, is to be able to differentiate your business. If you're not doing that, then you're just every other landscaping company or every other legal firm or you name it that's using all the tools that everyone else is using. And I understand why people do it. Like I said, it's tough to do this without a technical team that's part of your business, but that's precisely the value, and that's the technology that Federated Computer brings to the market.
Yeah, and I'll be completely transparent, folks. That's kind of where I'm at in regards to my kind of entrepreneurial journey, where I'm trying the voice. How do I now that the voice is established, right? The brand, the voice, kind of however you wanted, the tone of the brand. How do I now leverage that across all systems, blogging, newsletters, making sure I'm following up with clients if they actually reach out to me, either from the Pitch Latino perspective for the pitch competitions, or from the podcast perspective, or from healthcare, or from just advising perspective, right? The CRM. And all of these and things, right, need to kind of correlate. Except one of the things I find myself getting frustrated, and David, you kind of alluded to, is I don't have a team. So therefore, I'm
Right.
having to go to each one of these locations and remember each one of these individual logins, remember these passwords, remember the workflow that I created for that specific software. And then when you get to the automation piece, right? Um, Even when you get the product, even when you purchase the item, it's like an onion, right? Because there's additional layers. So if you actually wanted to integrate with this product, oh, that's an additional charge over here, an additional charge over here. And so it really does kind of get cumbersome for an entrepreneur, but also very, very expensive. And so I imagine this actually is also a very good cost saver for entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. That's the principal thing. We can typically, the cost of Federated Computer to what the typical Federated customer was spending is about 1/10 the price. And we can do that, like I said, because we're experts in cloud optimization. We're leveraging open source. By the way, we're not just sort of pirates that are using the open source without contributing. We pay back. We contribute to these projects. We're part of the ecosystem. But this is what open source and the digital transformation you get from open source can bring to people economically. And we see that already in cloud services. People are able to build these massive, massive business on top of cloud service providers, all because of open source. Would not have been possible without that. And what we're trying to do at Federated is do the same thing for sort of the business owner, the business user, and bring the same power of open source that we were very successful with the developers, and bring that directly to the business owner.
Yeah, I love it. Now, who would you say is your typical client? Who do you kind of target?
Well, today, and this is sort of today, it's a smaller business, a small, medium business, maybe up to a few hundred employees. But there is no typical sort of business industry that we're serving. We've got lawyers, we've got dentists, we've got doctors, we've got, professionals, we've got service industries, we've got all that. We've got people in North America, we've got people in Europe, we've got people in Asia. Everyone can can benefit from open source and from the federated product. By the way, I want to mention, because it's open source, if you try federated computer and you say, well, I like these products, but I really don't like federated computer. Excuse me. Well, great. There's no rat trap here. You can go and use these products that we've bundled together. You can use them on your own with different other service providers. Our value is that we sort of make it easy for you to assemble it and for you to use it all together. But there are other places you can use it. And every one of our products has tens of millions of users across the globe. So these are tried, tested products. We think it's a really great value for businesses.
Yeah, folks, I'm not lying. I'm looking at it, and it just, again, going through the pain points of just this morning of the different SaaS products, the different monthly and yearly subscriptions, and then I think every time you get a new business, it's a new Google business profile, essentially. So
Well,
continues to grow.
let's come up with a great coupon for your listeners and viewers. Let's see, what would be a good coupon that we could hand out, and 30% off the first year. Why don't we do
30% off. I love it. So let's go. We're gonna go Shades 30.
Shades 30. So if you use in checkout Shades 30, you'll get 30% off your first year at Federated Computer. And we'd love to have people, we'd love to get the feedback and sort of get the feedback so we can continue to make the product the best it possibly can be.
I love it. Again, folks, Shades 30. This will be on the shadesofe.com. Now, one thing I would encourage you folks, if once you guys get the product, please send David some testimonials. That's really where our businesses truly thrive. If you love the product, share about it, talk about it, tell people about it, let people know, including David. And if you don't like the product, just let David know. You don't have to share everybody with that part, but go and let David know so he can continue to, figure out ways, and his team to figure out ways to improve the product. Because again, it sounds like, David's focus really is how does it make your life easier, right? You are the end user.
We definitely want to make sure that our customers are finding value from the product. If they're not getting value, then there's just no point. And so we offer a 30-day free trial. If they don't like it, we refund your money. And we also have a great community of people talking among federated computer users, how they're using these products. So you can sort of get great ideas on better ways that you can use the different products that make up Federated Core.
I love it. And again, folks, that's Shades 30, and it's going to be on the shadesofe.com. Go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll have all that information there. Now, David, for those that are interested, maybe learning more about you, maybe learning more about the company, where can they find you online? Where can they find this product or software?
So Federated Computer is at federated.computer, federated.computer. And, you're welcome to sort of reach out to us. I'm in the customer forum. The links are on the website, and I'd love to talk to anyone that has questions about open source. I also want to mention, if you're a software entrepreneur and you're looking to publish your own SaaS and it's open source, we'd love to include that in Federated Computer, and we've done that with a number of startup businesses. People that are maybe doing finance SaaS or other sorts of sort of specific SaaS. We're very anxious to sort of work with you and help you find your community.
Love it. Love it. Folks, again, Shades 30 for this product. Check it out, the federated.computer. We'll have this on the shadesofe.com. So make sure you go and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll have all this information as well as this conversation, and we'll have as well as links to the website. So go ahead and check out the shadesofe.com. You can also follow us on the social sites, Instagram, Facebook, and this episode will be available on YouTube. For those Patreon members, $5 a month, you can have access to this episode as well as a transcription a week early, as well as some additional information. David, I'm going to actually talk to you a little bit more about that SaaS information. So everybody else, thank you so much. Well, have a great night.
Thank you for tuning in to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. For more information, please follow the Shades of E on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or visit theshadesofE.com.